Buenos días. Good morning. Bonjour. That's impressive. The first thing I have to do is to congratulate the EA for this extraordinary success story. To congratulate... they gone? Oh, no. To congratulate you, Manuel. To congratulate you, Diego del Alcázar, and your father. Please tell him how impressive I am. I know the EA from many, many years ago, and the development and the growth of this center is really astonishing. Spain is very proud of it, and I hope that this center will contribute to the formation of the new elites and also to make Spain better known in the world. So thank you for inviting me and congratulations for this extraordinary success. Well, I have to salute all people here, ambassadors, Secretary of State, as we say in Brussels, tout protocole observé, for not saying a long list of people and not forgetting anyone. But the most important ones are you, the faculty and the students, who honor me by your presence and attention. I've been asked to say some words about the world geoeconomics. Geoeconomics or geopolitics, both things go together. Today it's impossible to talk about politics without talking about economics and vice versa. And the word geopolitics is very much fashionable. In Brussels, everybody is willing to be geopolitical. Geopolitical is a key word. Geoeconomics is less used, but more and more we have to talk about the geoeconomic consequences of everything and how economics influences everything, in particular politics. So let's try to tell you what I am going to talk about. I think that there are the most urgent things. The most urgent things is the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine dominates everything. It's impossible to talk without mentioning it, especially for me, because I will never forget when at 5 o'clock in the morning, the 24th of February, my phone rang and a voice from the crisis center told me, "Hi Rep, they are bombing Kiev." And then I understood that the history has changed, that a new page of the history was open. Hi Rep, they are bombing Kiev. 1 year later, they are still bombing Kiev. So this event has changed Europe, has sent shockwaves to the whole world in terms of high prices of energy and food, has mobilized the European Union resources. We have allocated to Ukraine since this morning almost 50 billion euros, military, financially, economically, humanitarian, almost 50 billion euros. So the bill is high, but much more for Ukrainians who are losing a lot of people and its country being destroyed. We have to be sure that Ukraine will prevail, but Ukraine is not the only danger. Our neighborhood is in flames. Crisis in Moldova and Serbia, Kosovo, Syria, Libya. Have a look at the speech of the Secretary General of the United Nations a couple of days ago, explaining the problems of the world in which we live. From the gender apartheid in Afghanistan to massacres around the world and ending crisis in our immediate neighborhood. I spend most of my time talking with the Balkans, Serbia, Kosovo, in order to try to make peace or avoid war. The second big issue is the US China strategic competition. This will define our world on trade, on technology, and on security. This is the most important driving force of the history. The third one is the fact, the fourth one is the fact that everything is being weaponized. I am the High Representative for Foreign Policy, Security, and Defense. And what I can tell you is everything has become an arm. Migration, energy, data, investment, everything has become an instrument of power. And when we talk about hard power, we don't talk only about throwing bombs, not only about military. You can have hard power by many other means. The last one is the crisis of the multilateral system. Power politics is the fact of the day, power. In the United Nations, there are less agreements and many more vetoes, and the United Nations Security Council, the G20, the WTO, has been either distrust or frozen. So let's go a little bit deeper to any one of these issues, if I can. I will not have time to cover everything, but let's send to you some flashes. Let's start by, unavoidably, energy. We want to talk about energy, technology, and economy. Starting with energy, the most striking thing today is the massive rise in the price of energy, as you can see. It didn't start with the war, but the war has made it much worse. The share of the GDP spent on energy in the world has been passing to skyrocketing, as you can see there. But now, quickly, it's going down. It's going down, and due to a lot of facts, a crisis was triggered in Europe and beyond. But remember one thing, the price of energy is the price of freedom. We pay it in euros. Ukrainians are paying it with blood. What we had was an excessive dependency on Russian gas. Look at this count. Overall, 40% of our gas, I mean Europe, was coming from Russia. For some member states, like Hungary, it was 100%. For Germany, almost 60%. And we learned that the strategic intentions of suppliers and the nature of the regime of the country that supplies you matters a lot. But we have been very naive, because after the invasion of Crimea in 2014, we continued increasing our dependency on Russian gas. And we even built new pipelines, Nord Streams, in order to bring more Russian gas. So then the war came, and we decided to get rid of this dependency. And we managed to do that in a very short time. Look at that. Before the war, Germany, gas 55%, coal 50%, oil 30% coming from Russia. Today, gas 0%, coal 0%, oil 0%. That's really remarkable. In a few months, to cut such a strong dependency. Germany today doesn't use a single unit of energy coming from Russia. And by the end of the year, all European countries will have cut all dependencies on Russia. Maybe Hungary will become an exception for political reasons, and also because it's a landlocked country being supplied almost exclusively by Russia. Gas was our Achilles heel. Also because the price of gas is very much linked to the price of electricity. So look at the price of gas in July and August. 350 euros megawatt hour of gas. Do you know how many megawatts hour of gas you need to produce a megawatt hour of electricity? You know it? Well, 2. You need 2 megawatts hour of gas to produce 1 megawatt hour of electricity. So when you say 350 gas, it means 700 megawatt hour of electricity. This was the peak in August. Everybody was scared. Oh my God, where are we going to go with electricity at 700 megawatts hour? It was a febrile answer of the speculation in the markets from the beginning of the war to August, and then look at that. We are again at 55 euros megawatt hour, the same price that before the war. So what happened for this escalation and this going down? There are many reasons, and I would like to go to some of them. But the other graph, it's a shorter one. The blue line below is the price of gas in US. Can you see the difference? What do you mean that for the competitivity of our firms with respect to the American firms? When we were at 300, they were at 30, 10 times less. It's very difficult to compete if the energy input is 10 times more expensive. But this is really remarkable what has happened. What will happen? I don't know, but the important thing to notice is that we have to get rid of the Russian dependency. Next slide, please. This is the story of oil. The blue is the Russian oil. The red is the North Sea oil. The Russian oil is becoming less and less expensive due to our cap and due to the fact that the sanctions are being effective. Today, and this is a little bit old as figure, today the Russian oil is being sold at 40 euros barrel, half of the North Sea. And who is going Russian oil? Well, they are friends, India and China. It's not a complete global market for Russian oil. The cap on oil and the cap on gas, hard power, has been very important in order to decrease the revenues of Russia. Here you can see how the Russian revenues has been decreasing due to the war. In September, November, it was about 800. It will be more or less 300, from 800 to 300. There you can see, I cannot go in detail, but please have a look at that later. You can see the reasons why the income of Russia selling its energy will decrease from almost 800 to 300. Will, but it has already happened, because now it's at 640. And there you have the reasons, the political reasons, the geoeconomic reasons why we will manage to decrease the financial capability of Russia to continue waging the war. This is very important. Nobody can resist to have their revenues being cut from 800 to 300. I cannot go in detail for the reasons it happens, but it's important to study one by one. This is the way that our sanctions has been affecting the Russian economy. People say, well, sanctions are not effective. The war continues. Well, yes, the war continues because the sanctions has not a miracle effect overnight, but the Russian economy will pay a very high price for this war. Look, the Western companies who left Russia represents more or less 40% of its GNP. And there you can see how the Russian exports and imports has been changing from 2021 to 2022. And the following one shows, no, the following one is another thing. But there you can see inflation, private consumption. Russia will pay a heavy price for it. Let me put just one example, a practical example. Most of the gas fields of the Russian Federation are on the depletion mode. They will be exhausted. They have a lot, but in deep waters, in the Arctic, they don't have the technology to exploit these fields. If they want to exploit the new field gas, they need Western technology. And by the time being, they have not it, and they will not have it under the circumstances change a lot. Then let's have a look at the energy picture of the world. And here, one thing is striking, and should strike you. The world needs much more energy. To say that we will fight climate change by reducing energy consumption is not true. This is the picture today, 2022, and until 2026, this is the prospects of the amount of new energy consumption in the world. So the solution will not come by using less energy. Well, maybe for us. We use a lot of energy. But in Africa, there are 600 million people that they have never seen an electric bubble. 600 million people that they don't know what is electricity. And 40% of the humankind, 40% has never used internet. So if we want people to increase their level of well-being, we need to spend much more energy. The question is where this energy is going to come from. And on the other slide, you see where the energy has coming from since, let's say, the 65, the big expansion of the world economy. That's impressive. It's oil, it's coal, and it's gas who are still providing the bulk of the energy in the world. Yes, renewables have been increasing a lot, but what does it mean, a lot? Look, the role of the renewables, very low with respect to the consumption of gas, coal, and oil. Dirty energy, or carbon energy, has been increasing from 20,000 terawatt hours to 50,000 terawatt hours. Yes, you fight against climate change? Yes. Do we decrease the part of the carbon energy? No. The part of carbon energy remains today the same than 40 years ago or 60 years ago. More renewables, but much more CO2 being produced by our energy expansion. What does it mean that? That we have to push much more for renewables, but much more. And certainly it is the only way of stopping the consumption of gas, coal, and oil. The problem is that many poor countries have a lot of coal. Some have gas, others some have oil, and they don't have the financial resources to develop other sources of energy. So keep that in mind. The future of the climate and our future will be determined by the poor part of humankind, by the poorest people in the world. The way they will develop in order to become less poor will determine our future. We Europeans today, we represent only 8% of the world emissions, 8%. So if even tomorrow by miracle we stop producing a single gram of CO2, the problem will remain the same because it will be still 92% to be reduced. And who will be reducing it? The others. Among the others are the poorest. And the poorest have a more urgent problem to solve, is their subsistence. So we have in front of us an extraordinary problem of global justice. Who is going to pay the price in order to avoid that the expansion of the energy consumption of the less developed part of the world is not being done against climate? This is one of the most important geoeconomic and geopolitics of our time. So let's go to the second issue. It's the technological fight between US and China. Have a look at this graph. On blue, the world capitalization of digital companies from US. On red, the Chinese. Where are the Europeans? Where are the Europeans, Steve? The very small one, the light blue. The big one is the Americans. They're not as big, but quite big are the Chinese. And in this world, US is very much worried by the technological development of China. It's a battle for supremacy. China is rising fast. They want to do still faster. And the US has started taking measures in order to prevent this growth. And there you can see the number of Chinese entities that US has put on an export blacklist by sector. Blacklist means that it is forbidden to export to these companies. Well, in 2012, nothing happened. Even in 2018, nothing happened. But now look on the sectors of technology, surveillance, telecommunications, the number of Chinese firms that the US has decided to ban from the possibility of receiving exports. It has become a national security strategy. The US talk about the decisive decade in front of us. And in 10 years, they want to prevent China from becoming the number one in technology. This will require to accelerate the domestic innovation, and bill will require also to increase subsidies. Remember what happened with Huawei? Now the next battle is about microchips, not only for military purposes, but for anything. Understand me well, they don't want to destroy Chinese. They need China. Decoupling, nobody wants to decouple from China, and it would be impossible anyway. But they want to try to control the supremacy that China could have if the current trend on technological development continues. Cooperation with China will continue, but it will be controlled. And on this fight, look at these concrete names. Something is wrong. Okay. I was saying that on this fight, look at very concrete names. Some of them, maybe no one of you knows, because there are 4 non-US companies that are on the rise and will be decisive on this fight. TSMM, Taiwan, ASML, Netherlands, the only European one, BYD, China, and CATL in China. Who are they? Who are they? Well, all of them are in the business of chips and batteries. And remember that the more precise the chips are, the greater is the concentration of its production. And today, who produces chips for the whole world? Taiwan and South Korea. Taiwan and South Korea dominate the market. This is the size of the chips. The slimmer one. The slimmer one is TSMC and Samsung. The two of them produce almost 100% of the smaller chips in the world, while other chips with less nanometers, with more nanometers are being produced by others, but the most effective, the most modern chips are being produced only, or almost only, by these two firms. And there you can see the same thing, more or less. Look Europe. Look Europe. The blue one. Look Taiwan. US is trying to make an effort and increase, but very far away from Taiwan or South Korea and Japan. If you look at the cake, TSMC, only TSMC and others from Taiwan represent such a big part. If you add Samsung, you will see that China is only 6%, and others, all others, including us, it's 30%. So that's why in Europe we have just approved the CHIPS Act in order to develop our chip capacity production. But there are other actors. Tesla, this is Tesla, and this is BID, a Chinese firm, which are competing for battery electric and hybrid cars. BID is not as well known as Tesla, but it is as much important. And then you have ASML, our company, who is having a lot of problems because the US want the Dutch government to prevent exports from ASML to Taiwan or to China. And keep in mind one thing, ASML produces the machines to produce the chips, but the production of chips is in Taiwan, but with machines produced by ASML. So it's not true that we don't master the technology, we don't have the mass production, but ASML produces the tools to produce. The production has been developed in Taiwan, but using ASML machines. And there is a big political fight about, can ASML sell their machines to China? US wants the Dutch government from preventing it from happening. But certainly there is a certain reluctance or resistance to do so. How are these machines? Well, this is the most advanced ASML machine to produce the smaller chips. It costs 160 million euros. It weighs 180 tons, and you need 3 Boeing 747 to transport it. So it's not a small machine. It's not a cheap machine. It's not an easy thing. Who do it? We, the Europeans. Who use it? The Taiwanese. And the Chinese would like also to have it. But the Americans doesn't want the Dutch to provide with this very important element. So here's the fight, you see? Here's the fight. Look, mining, processing, material production, and technology. You mine, you produce, and you use the final technology. Who is doing that? At the end, on batteries and solar PV, the orange one is China. China is everywhere, but especially on the technology manufacturing. Can you imagine? 80% of all solar cells in the world is being produced in China. 80% of all batteries is being produced in China. 70% of the wind, of the heat pumps, of the electrolyzers. Who is producing cobalt? Mining in Congo. Mineral processing in China. Lithium in China. Aluminium steel in China. The gray is the rest of the world. Is this because we don't know how to do it? Yes, we know. But it was so less expensive to do that in China that we did the same thing. And let me say one thing important. Today, our technological dependency on China is bigger than our energy dependency on Russia. We are more dependent on China on technology than we were dependent on Russia on energy. And it's not going to be so easy to get rid of this dependency. So I don't want to go deep on that, but I want just to make a seminal word for you to think about it. And the last idea is about the economy on itself. We are living in a global slowdown. The latest figures of the World Bank says that the world will only grow 1.7%, only 1.7%. China will be on the lowest growth rate of their modern history, maybe not even 3%. And this represents something important for a country where the authoritarian power rely mainly on their capacity to increase the well-being of the people. And we have a problem of a slowdown of the economy and increase on inflation. Inflation is going down very quickly, but we don't know what's going to happen with the growth. The inflation reached high peaks, almost 160% in poor countries like Sudan or South Africa people, because they were very much dependent on the food coming from Ukraine, and the war stopped the flow of food. And they suffer a lot from high levels of inflation. Now it seems that things are going better, but there is a big question mark about how inflation and growth will go. By the time being, not very well. The answer of the central banks has been a high increase on interest rate. The interest rates have been increasing because the central bank have acted in a determined manner with unprecedented monetary tightening. And the Federal Reserve has been leading that. This has made a big increase on the dollars. We have been seeing a surge of the dollar. And this has represented a lot of problems for developing countries to service their debt denominated in dollar. As you see, it is the biggest action of the central banks altogether increasing interest rate. And the increase in the dollar has created a lot of problems, especially for developing countries, who were very hard hit by the pandemic, by the war, and now by rising interest rates. Many will have difficulties to access to capital markets. We face the risk of debt crisis. Sri Lanka was the first. It will not be the last. We see an increase on inequality, on poverty reduction, and on the development goals. Here you can see how the slowdown has been hitting especially the less developed countries. And the prospect for them is to face a debt crisis, and in any case, a reduction of the fight against poverty. There you see how the progress in poverty reduction has been stalled. These are bad news for the world, because this world is very much unequal, and the consequences of the war and the consequences of the reaction in front of the war, inflation plus interest rate, has slow growth, higher inflation, will create a lot of problems for the weakest part of the humankind. This is the lenders. And what do you see? Who has become the great lender? Once again, China. The big blue zone. At the beginning of the century, China was not an operator on the debt market. And now it has the biggest part of the debt. And China is not part of the Club of Paris. So there are bilateral agreements. How China will react in front of a new debt crisis, being, as it is, the biggest lender in the world. China has just become the banker of the world. How they will react if there is a new debt crisis? This is another geoeconomic question that you have to take into consideration. Here you can see the proportion of poor countries who are at the risk of the stress. But for me, it's more important the fact that China will be confronting a new situation. It's a situation that we Western people, we are used, is the fact that you give loans and people are unable to pay back these loans. Well, this is more or less what I wanted to tell you. I think that we Europeans, we have to have a clear idea of our size. At the beginning of the century, we were 25% of the GDP. Sorry, we were 35% of the GDP, and now we have decreased to 25% of the GDP. From the point of view of market capitalization of our firms, same thing happened. We were at 30%, we are at 15%. So it's clear that there is a shrinking of what, in terms of big economic figures, Europe represents in the world, but we are still an unavoidable actor because we have a strong engagement through our policies of cooperation and through our policies of trade. Trade, I want to illustrate that with this image. If you ask who is the first trade partner, only two, China and US, and you compare 80 with 2018, you see how much China has been taking the lead. You compare only China and US. But there are a third actor, who is the European Union. And then instead of two colors, you use three colors, then it's not so clear, because the European Union also exists, and we play an important role in Africa still, and over the equator and in the south, we play an important role in India, we play an important role in the Middle East. But look, in Latin America, today, the first trade partner is no longer Europe. It's everywhere China. All Latin American countries trade more than China that with anyone else. That's not true for Africa. For Africa, we still play a role in India, in the Middle East, but it's clear that the expansion of China as a trade power has a long-term trend and consequences. And here the question is the globalization slowing? This is globalization. Globalization is globalization. Well, it looks like, because it started growing, and for the first time, it has been decreasing. Not a lot, but does it mean a trend or is it just an accident? We don't know. But one thing is clear, is that more and more the trade is being done among countries of the same continent. The trade is being done among regions, global, not the whole world, but regions. The regional trade is growing, the global trade is decreasing. And this is part of the big rift between EU and US. EU and US, I'm not talking about China, I'm talking the EU-US, over the green industry and jobs. This is the matter of today. Yesterday, President von der Leyen gave a speech at Davos. Here's my president, President von der Leyen, talking about the competition between EU and US, and talking about how do we manage it. One solution could be to let every country to give state aid. But look, since the beginning of the pandemic, this is Germany, this is France. The two of them represent 75% of the whole amount of state aid of the European industry. And let me try to summarize in a couple of sentences what it's about. The ERA, the tool that President Biden has proposed in order to fight against inflation, has little to do about fighting inflation. What is behind it is $350,000 million on subsidies. It's a big push to subsidies. It will have not a lot of influence on inflation. It's a good word to use to fight against inflation because everybody is in favor of fighting against inflation. But it is a job creation machine by giving subsidies to American firms, excluding other firms, and on my understanding, against the rule of WTO. And when we go and complain and we say, well, you should not do it because you are creating a competitive gap against us, the Americans answer, do you the same thing? We don't matter. We don't care. We subsidize them. Do it. Subsidize. You too. Well, if the world goes in a competition who subsidizes more, then forget about globalization or forget about global exchanges. We go back to the old times of competition through subsidies. But there is a big difference between the US and the European Union. The US is a federation, it's a political entity. So the federation, the federal power, Washington, have the monetary power and can give subsidies to the whole of the American economy. We are not a federation. We are not a political unity. And in Brussels, we don't have the same capacity than US to provide subsidies to the whole European economy. And if we let it be done member state by member state, then we are going to fragment the internal market, because the most powerful countries will be better placed to support more their own industries, and then the competition, the fair competition that tries to avoid subsidies is over. So we cannot do like our American friends do, because we are not a political entity and we are not going to be tomorrow. Anyway, our answer to this pandemic has been impressive. We broke a taboo, and now we have a strong discussion with the US about how do we react to these decisions that represents also the end of the story started in the year 2000. On 2000, the Western world pushed for China becoming member of the WTO, because we believe that trade will make political changes in China. It will be an evolution towards a multi-party political system as us. This has not happened, and it will not happen. By the contrary, we are now going to this confrontation based on technology and based on industrial capacities. And this will mark the future of the world. The important thing is where we will be, the Americans and the Europeans.